Today in Formula One, we witnessed an astonishing crash, unlike anything we've seen in the sport for a long, long time. The contact itself was astonishing, the response from the medical crew, astonishing, and the fact that Romain Grosjean has walked away with his life, again, astonishing. People are calling it a miracle that Grosjean is still with us, and understandably so. But I'm of the opinion that putting it down to just a miracle and nothing else does a disservice to those who have advanced safety to the point where this outcome is even possible in the first place. And with this in mind, everything that's happened today, I'd like to start the podcast by just saying thank you. Thank you to anyone and everyone who has had a part to play in bringing safety to this point. To those who started the process decades ago, we say thank you to you. To those who continued the discussion despite fallout from sponsors and circuits, we say thank you to you as well. To those who designed the Halo safety device and to those who helped implement it, again, thank you to you. Dr. Ian Roberts, Alan van der Merwe, we say thank you for your service out there today. And to every single marshal from across the globe, thank you as well. Safety will forever be a process that does not have a finishing line, but there is always more that can be done. And it's important that we learn from this, but for now, all we can do is express our gratitude to these people and to be thankful that Romain Grosjean can still be with us and he can still be with his wife and children. A warm welcome to Harry Eade and Sam Sage. An afternoon that was pretty much like no other, guys.
Oh my good lord! Talk about moments that you watch, that you experience. It's strange. I didn't really understand what I was feeling watching it, and of course, above all now is relief and gratitude that we watched Romain Grosjean somehow have the ability to unbuckle himself from that car and jump over that fence, that rail with possible broken ribs, burnt feet, burnt hands. It was spectacular in a way that Formula One shouldn't be. But I mean, thankfully, the befitting named Halo came to the rescue, really, didn't it? For those that have slandered the technical advancements that we've had and the look of that Halo, that has undoubtedly saved a man's life today. That is the kind of the cherry on top that made sure that he was going to make it through that barrier and still be okay. The fact that they showed images of that monocoque, that, you know, what they call, like, was it the crash cell, the safety cell of the Formula One car afterwards, and the back end is ripped off and 6 feet away. The front wing is obliterated, but there, where Grosjean is sitting, the seat, the cockpit, the halo is in one solid piece. And it's actually just the impact itself that's possibly broken Grosjean's ribs. And the fact that he is going to be able to speak to his wife and his children after what was one of the most shocking impacts I've ever seen in Formula One is just wonderful. I would not be shocked. I would not blame him if he calls up Haas in a couple of days' time and goes, "That's it. Thank you. I've had my fun. I was only 2 races away anyway, but I'm all right now. I'll leave it there." Because what a hero. What a hero everyone involved was. It was brilliant to see Formula One come together. We do races one, which is nice to see. His life it's amazing. It was absolutely incredible to see that he got out of there alive. I am flabbergasted, quite emotional. I went through a period where I was quite emotional after all that.
Yeah, I mean, stunned. I'm still a bit stunned now that he walked out of it, and there are so many factors within that crash. You know, so many different things that could have seriously harmed him more than he was. You know, he's only got minor injuries, thankfully, and B, that could have killed him. Yeah, and yet, you know, he's had neither of those things happen to him. Thank God. Yeah, just so peculiar, strange, extraordinary, spectacular, as Sam said, in the wrong way. But yeah, just grateful that old Romy G, as we like to call him, did walk away from it. And yeah, Sam, I'm totally with you. I don't think anyone would begrudge Roman at all if he this week phoned up Gunther and was like, "You know what, I'm done here. I'm not going to do that again." Yeah. I don't think anyone would blame him at all. And yeah, and just, you know, thank you to all the medical teams that are on, you know, the medical car that got there, you know, within seconds. That's what it's there for bloody Dr. Ian Roberts to running towards a fire. Like, how many people do that? Not many. And then obviously all the work that's done over the years for the people that are, you know, Sid Watkins, Jackie Stewart, Charlie Whiting, etc. All the people that have done that work over the years to make F1 safer, because even pre 2018, if that had been a 2017 car with no halo, I think maybe Grosjean wouldn't be here. So yeah, thank you to all of them.
Yeah, and it's slightly ironic actually, because I was listening to the Beyond the Grid podcast a few days ago, and it was Jochen Mass who was the guest. Jochen Mass won a Grand Prix in the 1970s, raced in the 70s and 80s, and he had a pretty similar. The incident itself wasn't similar, but he had a pretty similar situation in that he was at the time in an underperforming car, and he was involved in a pretty horrific incident in France. And he decided, even though he kept racing after that in other forms of motorsport, that was his last Formula One race, because the team itself wasn't in a strong enough position that he believed it warranted him coming back to the team, which you could argue is a similar position to maybe what Grosjean feels he's in now. Of course, safety is far more advanced today than it is back then, and those sorts of incidents that we've seen from Romain Grosjean, you would hope, are more far and few between. So, but yeah, interesting that maybe there's parallels in those two situations. We're going to be having a look at the race, obviously, itself after the events unfolded there. Racing Point, no points whatsoever from this Grand Prix after it looked like Sergio Perez was on course for a podium until car issues with just a few laps to go. Alex Albon, the beneficiary there, picking up his second career podium. Valtteri Bottas, debris meant that he had an early pit stop and a fight back from P16 up into P9. We'll be discussing whether he did enough. Driver of the day, worst driver of the day, and a bit on Danny Kvyat as well. Obviously, he was involved in the Grosjean incident, but he was also involved in another incident a little bit later on that cost him 10 seconds in the way of a penalty when Lance Stroll was flipped. The car was flipped over in that incident. So we will start, though, with Romain Grosjean, just to touch on that a little bit more. Sam, do you think that we've seen this year with coronavirus and how the F1 teams came together to tackle that? We've had another incident here. Do you think this just shows, even with the politics that happens on a daily basis, teams disagreeing with one another, that when push comes to shove, the teams will band together and that they do race as one?
I mean, what more evidence do you need than to watch the first kind of half an hour of the race broadcast today? The tears from people that were in separate garages, not part of the Haas garage. We saw tears from McLaren, we saw tears in Racing Point. I'm sure there were tears elsewhere at that, a sudden realization that a beloved member of the paddock, whether that be, for future reference, driver, steward, marshal, safety car driver, it could be anyone, but Romain Grosjean is beloved. And the fact that there was an opportunity to have lost him there shows that, when it comes to someone's life, when it comes to ensuring that we get to enjoy this sport, this spectacle that gets put on for us every single year safely, whether we know that these guys are going to make it home to their families, that they will do anything they can. And I think that's clear. We saw people, Hamilton at one moment reacting, and then we saw members in the background who unfortunately I can't name, because they're part of pit crews and things like that, reacting exactly the same way. And this is one of those moments that, regardless of where you are publicly, regardless of who you are on a team, I'm sure at any moment you would have been the first person to raise your hand to help Grosjean if you had the ability to do so. And that does show that I think all Formula One teams and all members of those teams are within this sport together. And the moment it endangers anyone to that point where it's shocking, where it's life-threatening, they do come together. They stick together. And that's what we love to see, is the fact that, at the end of the day, we're all in it for the right reasons. And it was good to see that. I mean, you shouldn't have to see that to prove it. But when push came to shove, we did see it. And it was the right thing to see. So I'm really proud of the entire F1 paddock, F1 grid. Even the FIA, when they came out to check those barriers, it felt like they gave enough time. They checked everything properly. There were the correct checks given. The way the bloody marshals sprinted in there, better without any safety gear, and they were stood about 4 or 5 feet away from this inferno on a track with batteries that could have exploded at any moment. It makes you appreciate what these people give. Remember that those stewards on the sides, or the marshals on the side of that track, they're just volunteers. They get no payment out of this. They do it because they love our sport and they want the sport to go ahead. And I think it says so much about how willing and committed every single person on that track, week in, week out, is to making this sport the spectacle it is. And for those that don't call motorsport a sport, those that don't recognise it, have another look at what just happened today, because you'd be silly to think that ridiculous opinion in my thoughts. It's breathtaking. So yeah, did me proud today in a horrible situation.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's really tough to come up with the words to describe the situation that we saw out there. And we've actually spoken quite a bit on safety over the last few weeks, because there have been a few incidents, a few questionable incidents that we've seen, particularly in Istanbul. And even after what happened today, we saw a marshal later on in the Grand Prix when Perez went out to the side of the track. We saw a marshal go across the track, not long before, Norris went by. Do you think, Harry, this means that even though it is wonderful that Grosjean has survived this incident, that it's just a stark reminder that we still have to continually strive to proceed?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You know, we, as you said, we've had a few incidents this year, but I think the Grosjean incident and the way that it was dealt with, and the way that he was able to get out of the car, I mean, thankfully, but I think that all the procedures that are in place do work in terms of the safety on the car, safety in the barriers, although I know he went through the barrier, and also having the medical car there as well, and the way that the marshals are positioned on the track. But yeah, again, the marshal running across the track at the end of the race, you know, it's it can still easily go so wrong, as we've seen today, or on two occasions almost. So yeah, and yeah, the FIA have had some issues this year, but I think I'd hope we could call them freak, because to have days like today where it goes horribly wrong and the driver can still walk away from it, which is what all those procedures are there for. So yeah, I don't doubt that the continual pursuit of safety or further safety in F1, well, it will still continue for sure.
Yeah, such a chilling incident, and so much that could have gone wrong. When I say gone wrong, I mean beyond what already went wrong in terms of the Grosjean incident. The fact that he was able to get out of that fire as quickly as he did, the fact that he wasn't knocked unconscious by the initial impact, meaning again he wasn't in that fire for longer than he needed to be. The response time from everyone around him. There were so many things that could have gone wrong, that could have led to a much worse outcome. Current status is that Grosjean has been taken away to hospital, but injuries are relatively minor considering the incident itself. Looks like broken ribs, minor burns as well to the hands. But yeah, I'll just leave this segment by saying we wish all the best for Romain Grosjean in his recovery in the coming weeks, and we're so thankful that we can still talk about him in the present rather than the past. So moving on to the race itself, because there's a 45-minute delay, standing restart later on. Racing Point. Lance Stroll didn't have a very long time in the race at all, but Sergio Perez did have quite a substantial amount of time in the race. He was P3 for pretty much the entire Grand Prix until just a few laps from the end. His engine went, no, not today, meaning he didn't get back-to-back podiums for the first time in his career, which would have been the case. Sam, do you think that Racing Point's challenge for P3 is now over, considering McLaren's 4th and 5th points all today?
Firstly, I just want to say how devastated I am for Sergio Perez. The man has done everything he could do to prove that he deserves a drive for next season, and the fact that it's currently looking like he's, one, not going to get a drive, which is gutting for one of the best drivers on the grid at the moment, and two, the fact that he couldn't even get that little bit of glory to his name right at the end of possibly his final season in Formula One. A back-to-back podium would have been so well-deserved. He drove so well all race. He got a great start, the first time around, gets in front of Bottas, who was struggling, holds off the rest of the guys behind him. Then on the second Obviously, standing start again does a great job. Right up behind Verstappen, holds on nicely, which is great to see. And the guy is just working that craft brilliantly. And that engine failure was so horrible to watch. I mean, it could have happened to anyone, but I think Perez might have been the person that deserves it least, if you could deserve an engine failure, because he deserves a little bit of goodness to come his way in his last season. But has this taken Racing Point away from third place? 2 races to go. The form of Norris and Sainz is getting better and better every single race, it feels like. And it feels like, for some reason, Racing Point, even with their 2019 Mercedes build, aren't able to maximize the car in the same way that Mercedes themselves are. The engine doesn't seem to be carrying them with the same power. McLaren are able to use that Renault power to a good strength and are good around power tracks. And unfortunately for Racing Point, the last 2 races, definitely with the Sakir outer loop, is a power track. It's downright down to power. Now, Sergio Perez, I think, will probably be fingers crossed that he'll have to have a new engine and that won't fail for him in the last 2 races. And you never know. The same thing could happen to Sainz and Norris, or one or the other. And Stroll, of course, who ended up upside down. He was just hanging out at turn 8. He definitely could score himself some points. And Stroll has come on leaps and bounds this season as well. So I wouldn't rule them out entirely. I'm not going to say it's game over, but it is definitely, 45-30 to McLaren with match point going their way. And I think one thing goes wrong for Racing Point in the next race, then it's game over.
What do you reckon, Harry? Do you think that fight for third is over?
It's not over. It's never over if you learn anything from F1, it's never over until that final corner of the final lap of the final race of the season. But it's definitely more difficult for Racing Point, that is for sure. And yeah, McLaren are on strong form, it seems, around Bahrain. I think they were, they admitted themselves they were disappointed about their qualifying positions yesterday. They didn't think it reflected where they truly were on pace. And they were much stronger in the race. That being said, they weren't as strong as Perez was. But yeah, it's going to be much more difficult for Racing Point now to regain third. But I'm not gonna rule them out of this. And just to echo what Sam said, I feel really so bad for Checo. I mean, he was up there with driver of the day, which we'll get onto. But he deserved that podium, that last spot. And for God's sakes, I almost got another podium prediction right. God damn you, Mercedes engine. Like I said, echo what Sam said there. It's cruel luck, but it's gonna be difficult for them to come back for it. But I won't 100% say that it's impossible for them to do, because we know that's not true in F1.
Honestly, a Mercedes power unit spoiling things yet again. It's just been the tale of this hybrid era, hasn't it? The awfulness of that. Anyway, well, I don't think Racing Point's challenge is quite over yet. This is a massive dent, though. 17 points between themselves and McLaren, and with 2 Grand Prix to go, an average of 8.5 point swing each race. I mean, that's perfectly achievable, but this does make it very difficult. And just a side note as well, and this could very well be the difference at the end of this season. 171 for McLaren plays 154 for Racing Point. That 17-point gap becomes 2 points if you take away the 15-point deduction that Racing Point got for the Mercedes debacle. So there is that to bear in mind. Regardless, Sergio Perez, I'll echo what you said there. So unlucky not to get back-to-back podiums. And we often see with midfield, quote-unquote midfield podiums, that they get their way as a result of luck. But honestly, Perez drove the perfect race out there. There was never any doubt in him staying ahead of Alex Albon in the Red Bull. I mean, I think at best or at worst, depending on what stance you're looking at it, I think it was about 3 seconds between Albon and Perez. But generally speaking, that gap was closer to about 6-7 seconds for the majority of the Grand Prix. Perez seemed very, very comfortable. Did he take advantage of Bottas? The debris that he picked up early on? Sure, but someone had to be there to do so. Perez had a wonderful race. This again goes back to the point that we made in Turkey. This doesn't prove that Perez should have a spot on the grid. It's just a little little bit extra. That, he's already given more than enough evidence to suggest he should be on the grid. This is just another little bit to throw in there as well. In terms of, McLaren did very well out there. Lando Norris drove a superb race. He was solid from start to finish. Carlos Sainz, considering where he started, he did a great job. Racing Point definitely would have put this out and would have suspected that this race could have been not a clincher for them getting third in the championship, but this would have been a massive step for them, because judging on their pace in practice, they had a slight edge over McLaren. Considering what happened to Carlos Sainz, that's a little bit of extra misfortune for McLaren that should have been fortune for Racing Point that they couldn't take advantage of, because one of their cars was also out in Q2 on Saturday. And then in the race, obviously, Sainz does a great job. Norris does a great job. And even though Sergio Perez is there by himself, fighting alone, essentially, this is a massive dent in what they will hope would have been a P3 season for them. And Ferrari, I think we all suspected that their performance in these next few races is not going to be strong enough to feature, and that proved itself to be true out there today. But Renault, who will probably be a bit disappointed, they're 10 points further back again from Racing Point. And I find it beautifully ironic almost that McLaren and Renault and Racing Point, they spend hundreds of millions of pounds on putting together the best Formula One solution they possibly can. And ultimately, these championship positions so often don't come down to those millions that they try and spend against each other in an arms race. They come down to minor strategic decisions that we see in Grand Prix. Renault did an awful job of managing their drivers when they were in direct battle with the McLarens out there. And it's likely that will cost them at least a chance of getting P3 in the championship, rather than anything else relating to finance. But yeah, that's it looks like Renault are out of it as well. So I think there is still a chance Racing Point can get P3, but they've made it much more difficult for themselves today. And to focus on Alex Albon, who was the beneficiary of Perez retiring, he got elevated to P3, his second podium of the season, his second podium of his career. What did you make of Albon's weekend, Harry? Because we often speak about how he should be the backup to Max Verstappen, and technically speaking, that's what he did out there today.
Yeah. Look, this is going to be the nice segment, I think, of the Alex Albon chat, because I'm going first.
Sure.
And we have Mr. Sam Sage next. Just to warn Albon fans, this will be the nicest bit. Yeah, I mean, technically, if you put it like that, Ben, he did kind of do the job he was supposed to, but he was gifted that podium by that pesky Mercedes engine going bang on the, with 2 laps to go. And he was close to Perez most of the race, but again, he wasn't there backing up Verstappen, and he was nowhere near Verstappen's pace. He was not close enough to Verstappen to be a threat to Hamilton, which is what Verstappen needs if he needs to take on Hamilton. He's normally the one being attacked by 2 Mercedes. I mean, today wasn't that case because Bottas had issues. But normally he needs it the other way around, where he's got a Red Bull teammate that can at least help him tackle Hamilton, because he's struggling to do it on his own. He's given it a bloody good go, but he's not quite able to do it on his own. So, if the finishing positions perhaps make it look better for Albon than it actually was, I get the point. He did bounce back after his crash in FP2, but that was of his own doing, and he was still miles behind, Verstappen in terms of time in quali. And he wouldn't have ended up on the podium had it not been for Perez. So, I think he's probably now done enough to keep his seat next year, but he's got to do more, because it won't be enough. A race like that today won't be enough to keep his seat past 2021, I don't think. And now, Albon fans, you need to turn off, because, as I said, that was nice.
Yes, thank you for doing that announcement for me. Save my breath. Sam, go.
So, we all know that Mercedes is the fastest car. Yeah, we can all agree on that universally. And we all know that Red Bull...
No.
Oh, all right.
No.
Well, that's throwing my segment out the window.
Williams.
Okay. In the rest of late breaking, Williams is fastest. But for us sane F1 fans out there, folks, we know that Mercedes is the top of the pile. And Red Bull, arguably the second best car, yeah? Verstappen is only, 11 points off of second place Bottas in the Drivers' Championship. And was the closest man by any means to Lewis Hamilton. If you remove that extra pit stop that Verstappen did to try and claim the fastest lap of the race, there was about 5 seconds between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton today. And arguably that Mercedes is much faster than the Red Bull as well. So Hamilton, with all his prowess, fantastic. He won the race. He did what he needs to do. Verstappen, again, fantastic drive from Verstappen. He does everything he can physically do to get the best performance out of that car. Now, we've had the debate all season long, really. It feels like it, from at least race 4 or 5, of who takes that secondary seat. And the name Sergio Perez is pretty much been the running favourite for that seat. Alongside Albon. And if you wanted a visualization on track of why you were to take Perez over Albon in this situation, you couldn't have had a better example today on track. The fact that Verstappen is, say, on the start-finish line, and you're going to trace back in terms of time, and, 30 seconds back, in a car that is significantly weaker than the Red Bull, is not Alexander Albon, it's Sergio Perez. Sergio Perez is leading the other Red Bull by a few seconds again. So Albon is a full pit stop and a bit behind, with a car in between. So if it's not Valtteri Bottas, it's now Sergio Perez. Sergio Perez is doing a better job at being Max Verstappen's teammate while not being in the Red Bull team. He's able to elevate a car that is not good enough to be fighting on the podium, while Albon is not able to get there. Albon lucked into the podium. Albon did the absolute minimum that he needed to do today. And if Bottas was not the unlucky man that he was, I think that, there'll be no podium for Albon today. I think that Albon would have been sat maybe in 5th place, trailing Perez around, and Bottas would have comfortably on the back of Verstappen, if not, Hamilton, Verstappen, Bottas. And then it would have been Bottas that picked up second, and and Verstappen to get second. And I just think that there's a lot of things that make Albon look good at the moment. The same happened in Turkey. Max Verstappen had a bad race. He still finished in front of Albon, and it made Albon look good on the overall standings. You'll look back at the standings in history, and you'll go, Albon was only 1 place behind Verstappen here. The same will happen here today. Albon was only 1 place behind Verstappen here as well. Again, it was luck. He was not in the best place he needed to be. He should have already been in front of Perez. He should be backing his teammate up no more than 5-6 seconds behind his teammate. The same gap to Verstappen as what Verstappen has to Hamilton. The Red Bull is clearly capable of being that close to the Mercedes, and the fact that Albon was almost a minute away from Hamilton before that final safety car came out is not good enough. He will get that seat for next year because it is the easy option for Red Bull. There's no faff about it. They haven't got to change their drivers around. It makes their reputation look better. It keeps their young driver program in the right place where it needs to be because it is not in a healthy spot at the moment. Perez is the biggest loser out of all this, and unfairly so in my opinion. Albon has not showed the performances this season he needs to have that drive. I hope he can turn it around next season. Otherwise, it will look like a massive mistake from Red Bull's part. For me, this was sheer luck. Sheer luck. He is doing the absolute minimum that Red Bull should be. And he should be much, much better and much, much closer. It was not good enough for me at all this weekend.
Yeah, that one is expected. And unfortunately, I'm not really going to help matters either, because I think there have been races this season, perhaps, where Albon has looked terrible, but hasn't actually performed at a terrible level. I think this was the opposite in that, I kind of agree with what Sam's saying here. Albon was made to look pretty good out there when, in fact, actually, the way in which the race unfolded, actually, it didn't end up as it really should have done. So, to take qualifying first of all, of course, there was just one position between Verstappen and Albon at the start. They shared the second row of the grid, but ultimately there was 0.6 of a second. Which around Bahrain, and we saw this quite a lot, particularly in practice, but also in qualifying in the race, there isn't actually a huge amount of opportunities to gain a huge advantage over your teammate. We see at some circuits where a driver will come in and be half a second, 0.6 faster than the other, and that might be replicated up and down the grid. At Bahrain, we saw a lot of incidents, like Ricciardo and Ocon, separated by 0.02 of a second. The Ferrari guys in qualifying and in practice could barely be separated by anything. And we saw that with other teams as well. So 0.6 at some circuits might be just about okay. Here, it's too much of a gap. And I know Red Bull have set kind of internal 3 tenths guideline for Alex Albon. So he's doubling that. And if you're to look at it in the race as well, if you're to convert that 3 tenths goal that they want Albon to be within of Max Verstappen, realistically, Albon should be finishing about 19 seconds or so behind Max Verstappen. That's 3 tenths replicated every single lap. It's not including the safety car laps as well, which actually help him out in that respect. Ultimately, after 44 laps of this 57-lap race, Albon was 30 seconds behind, which means actually he's averaging very close to what he did in qualifying, which was about 6 or 7 tenths behind Verstappen each and every lap, which is too much. Yes, he was there to take advantage of Sergio Perez's incident, and ultimately that's what you have to do when opportunities present themselves, is take them. But here's the problem. They need Albon to be the rear gunner for Verstappen, but there's 2 prongs to that. There's 2 different things that he needs to cover. Firstly, there's position that he needs to cover, which obviously directly relates to points. When Max Verstappen is P3, they need Albon to be P4 or P5. Let's just say that as an example. Which I know there was Perez in the middle of them, but he's almost covered that today. But the problem is that's only one element. The other element is time, because time relates to strategy, even if it doesn't relate to position itself. So we saw that Albon was in no strategic bother to Hamilton whatsoever because of how far away he was, even though he was only a couple of positions behind. Time relates to strategy. What does strategy relate to? Strategy relates to points. So you need to cover both of them off, which Albon isn't doing. Sometimes he's covering the position element of it off, but he's very rarely covering the time element of it off. So I don't think it was a brilliant race out there. I actually think there have been better races he's done this year where he's finished P5. Should we move on to driver of the day? Sam, who have you got?
There's quite a few examples. Now, I know that the world gave it to Roman Grosjean, and Roman Grosjean is very much in my thoughts, as is his family at the moment, for a swift recovery, and that there's no complications or anything like that. I'm not going to give it to Roman Grosjean because there was a rest of the race that we got to see. But I just wanted to make that point first, that I'm not doing it to be some heartless monster like I usually am to the other drivers on the grid. I think that Perez, definitely worthy of a mention. Fantastic drive from start to finish from Sergio Perez. Hamilton did a great job. Time management, kept it clean, did exactly what he needed to do. What you'd expect from a 7-time world champion at this point. Verstappen as well. Really, really great race. Really strong. He really tried to take it to the Mercedes, and I can't take anything away from him for giving it a go. I'm going to mix it up between the 2 McLaren boys, actually, today. I'm going to give it to Sainz. Sainz came back from 15th place on the grid to finish in 5th place. He got through a lot of carnage. His strategy was well worked. Made some great overtakes happen when he needed to as well. And Norris also had a great drive. I'm just, for the simple fact that Sainz had to do just that bit more, I'm going to give it to Sainz. But I do think there were a lot of really, really strong performances up and down the grid today. But for me, Sainz just gets it.
Driver of the day, Harry.
Yeah, like Sam said, there's quite a few options here. Agree with Sainz. Perez, obviously, another one. And Gasly too. He was one of the only ones who did a one-stop, which was impressive. He was kind of saved by the safety car at the end there, but, got to be in it to win it. But I'll plump for Norris, because I thought he was pretty impressive today. But, a lot of good performances out there.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Hamilton was brilliant, start to finish. Couldn't really have done a better job, to be perfectly honest. Both of the McLarens deserve credit. Perez deserves credit as well. I'm going to agree with Sam. I'll give it to Carlos Sainz. Starting P15, he had a tall order to get in and amongst the 2 Renaults and also his teammate, which he successfully did. And also, we saw that a lot of talk was to do with tyres before the race, and indeed during the race, and how durable they would be. Plenty of 2 stops, some 3 stops going on out there, which is very rare for a race in 2020. But we saw that Carlos Sainz, he did an exceptional job on that first stint on those soft tyres. People were expecting that those soft tyres would not be anything to race with. Like, everyone avoided the soft tyre in Q2. They all wanted to start on the medium tyres. They didn't want to touch the soft tyres. Carlos Sainz deciding at a position P15 that he would start on that tyre, he did a brilliant job. He went out there longer than most of the guys who started on the medium tyre and kept that pace. So when he came out after his first pit stop, he was only just behind the two Renaults, and ultimately with the tyre advantage at that point, he made it count. Some good overtakes out there as well. I thought Carlos Sainz was brilliant, so I'll give him driver of the day. Worst driver of the day, Sam?
And this one is actually trickier than best driver of the day or driver of the day. There's a lot of drivers that had very average drives. There's a lot of drivers that had very good drives. There weren't so many drivers that I thought were actually not great at all today. Albon was one of them. He's not going to get it for me, but again, I do think he really lucked into that one. I can't also give it to Valtteri Bottas either. Bottas, who I'm starting to think might be one of the unluckiest men in Formula One at this point, is not having a good time of it. Poor Bottas. But we're going to get onto him in more detail later on in the podcast. So if you're watching this on YouTube, by the way, full version on the podcast, go check it out, Spotify. So I'm going to give it to Sebastian Vettel. Now, Sebi Vet is clearly not happy in that Ferrari, and it was interesting to hear the complaints coming out of the car over the radio. You know, Leclerc going to hit me, whereas he's not leaving the space all of the time. You have to leave the space. And he doesn't think Leclerc did. And nearly repeating of Austria, which he obviously didn't like either because he was about 6 feet in the air at one point in Austria. He also said at one point that the car is undrivable and completely different to practice and qualifying, which is interesting. Firstly, because in qualifying, he didn't do great anyway, so it can't have been that good. And secondly, he clearly felt relatively comfortable because him and Leclerc were neck and neck for the early part of the race weekend. And when it actually got to the race, he was nowhere. But I also think that it's a driver like Sebastian Vettel that needs to be able to turn around a car that's struggling. He has the ability and the experience and should be able to show that I can pull a result out of a car that is not doing well. This is what a lot of people ask of Lewis Hamilton, isn't it? He's always done it in the best car. Well, actually, go look at the early 2012, 2011 region where McLaren weren't the best car. He did pull performances out of it. And they're asking the same of Vettel now in a struggling Ferrari. Leclerc is able to do this. Didn't have a great race today, don't get me wrong, but he still did better than Vettel. And I think Vettel was, unfortunately, quite poor. So for me, Vettel does get worst driver of the day.
Who have you got, Harry?
I laughed because I liked it that Sam was really struggling at first because he couldn't give it to the two people he'd like to give worst driver of the day to. I can't give it to Albon. I can't give it to Bottas either. What do I do?
What do I do? There's other bad drivers? I don't think either of them are bad. Okay, they're fine.
I would probably actually agree with Sam. Vettel wasn't great today. I think he was just really rattled after the restart. He was, as you said, he was annoyed at Leclerc. I mean, Leclerc came from a fair way back, and it could have gone wrong, but it kind of worked. It was kind of, I don't know. I just think Seb was just kind of rattled by the Grosjean incident. We heard Ted saying that he was just stood watching the TV screens, replaying the incident. Seb and Grosjean are kind of good friends at similar age, both have children, families, etc. And after he got off the first set of tyres, his pace wasn't too bad, in comparison to Leclerc. Yeah, that first stint, he absolutely dropped like a stone. And I think it just got in his head. And he also had to deal with the flipping, and when I say flipping, I mean rolling Lance Stroll car in the way as well. So, I'll give it to him. But I think I think it was just completely shaken up, which, maybe it's something he needs to deal with himself in terms of, look at himself, whether carrying on F1 is for him. But I just got that impression that he was shaken up after the crazy start we had to the race.
Yeah, I find myself in a similar position to what you said, Sam, where I don't actually think there were many poor performances out there. I'll give it to Kimi Räikkönen, but I think there are a few contenders that weren't all that bad, if that makes sense. Kimi Räikkönen, I know he was nearly put in the pit wall by Antonio Giovinazzi, which came out after the race, which potentially means this needs to be reviewed. But I'll give it to Räikkönen. He didn't seem to have the pace. He wasn't there in qualifying. Giovinazzi was quicker. Very nearly escaped Q1 did Giovinazzi, and Räikkönen didn't look like he was going to do the same. And in the race, it seems if Giovinazzi just had the legs on him. all weekend, which it's a shame. But I'll give it to Kimi. Moment of the race, Harry.
Oh, moment of the race. I mean, there's obviously one that springs to mind, but I don't know whether I want to give it to that because it was just horrendous. What should I give moment to the race to? I don't know. I can't think past Remy G, which is just horrid. But it's going to be and then not anything. To be honest, anything that happened after lap 1 will not go down in history, will it? We're not going to remember what happened in a few years' time. So it's going to have to be the crash with Grosjean.
Sam, what do you reckon?
I mean, I have to agree that Harry's right. That is going to be the most memorable moment, possibly of the F1 season. Hamilton winning a 7-time world champion, Remy G surviving what is one of the most horrific crashes we've ever seen. So I'm not going to give it to that because I want to try and be positive. I want to look past it. It was a risk of the race. And we've said how, utterly astonishing that whole process was. So my moment of the race was a disgruntled Martin Brundle bashing about how he'd like a cup of tea. And Simon Lazenby, like the little lackey boy he is, clearly sprinted across Bahrain with a thimble of black tea trying to pour some milk in. And Martin Brundle then looking down and going, "It's a bit naff, but at least I've got a tea. So cheers." I quite enjoyed how ridiculous that whole process was. Crofty had to ruin it, of course. But the Martin Brundle and Simon's interaction there, it put a little smile on my face. It was fun. It was a bit different. I like it. So for me, moment of the race.
That's the kind of commentary that I think A, we appreciate, and B, we do ourselves. So,
yeah, 100%.
So that is good. I completely forgot about Tea-gate, and lesson learned. If it ever comes to that, never ask Simon Lazenby for a cup of tea.